I was reborn on the day Stella Prescott's brother, Kyle, threw a briefcase full of cash at my feet. $5 million. We were in the blood-soaked locker room of their underground fighting ring. The first time this happened, I kicked the case aside and snarled, "My love for Stella isn't something you can buy." He just laughed, patting my cheek with contempt. Stella simply turned her back on me, cold and silent, and walked out to the stands. For her, I became the most vicious dog on her leash. I took knife for her. I risked my life for her. 10 years of blood and violence, and I collected 37 scars to prove it. In the end, during a shootout at the docks, I took 3 bullets for her. As I lay dying in a pool of my own blood, I watched her step over my still warm body, extend a hand to our enemy, and say without emotion, "A pleasure doing business with you." This time, I had no desire to be the rabid dog who couldn't even earn a single glance from her as he died. I bent down and quietly opened the heavy briefcase. 1. The acrid stench of blood and antiseptic filled my nostrils. I was back, right in front of me, the silver aluminum briefcase, the one holding $5 million in cash, was kicked to my feet by Kyle Prescott. "Ethan, $5 million. It's the price for you to get the hell out of Stella's world for good." Kyle's voice dripped with condescending charity. He nudged the case with the toe of his gleaming, handmade Italian leather shoe. The latches popped open, revealing stacks of crisp $100 bills, splayed like a mocking grin. Behind me, Kyle's crew of thugs snickered. $5 mil. That's a damn good price for a pathetic life like his. Shit, for that money, I get on my knees and thank him. I ignored them. My body still ached with the phantom pain of bullets tearing through my chest. Every breath felt like fire. I slowly lifted my head, my gaze traveling past Kyle's arrogant sneer to the person standing behind him. Stella was there. She wore a simple white dress, looking like an immaculate snow lotus in this filthy, blood-stained locker room. She looked at me, her perfect eyebrows knitting together in a flicker of irritation. My silence, it seemed, was boring her. In my past life, that single expression was what stung me into a frenzy, what made me kick the money away to defend my laughable one-sided love. All it got me was her cold, retreating back, and 10 years later, the finality of her stepping over my corpse. A tidal wave of hatred churned in my chest, threatening to choke me. But I forced it down. I crouched, my fingertips brushing against the cool, crisp paper of the bills. 10 years, 37 scars, 3 bullets. So this is all it was worth. I closed the case and lifted it. It was heavy as the 10 years of my life that had been crushed under their weight. I stood up and looked at Kyle, my face calm. He was taken aback for a second, then a sarcastic smirk spread across his face. "What? You finally came to your senses," he sneered. "Should have just done this from the start instead of being a cheap bitch." I didn't answer him. I walked straight towards Stella. She instinctively took half a step back, a defensive posture that drove a knife deep into the memory of my past life. I stopped in front of her, my voice perfectly level. A decade of my life. I guess it was only worth $5 million. Stella's expression flickered. She looked like she wanted to say something, but her innate pride kept her silent. I reached into the case and pulled out a single stack of bills. $10,000. Then I turned and walked back to Kyle. As he watched in stunned silence, I mimicked the way he had once treated me. I took the stack of cash and lightly tapped it against his stiffening cheek. Once. Twice. "Here's 10 grand. A tip," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence of the room. "Tell your sister to stop whoring herself out on the street." I let the word hang in the air. It's pathetic. The air in the locker room turned to ice. Kyle's face went from shock to crimson, then to a deep, mottled purple. "You're fucking dead," he roared, swinging a punch that whistled through the air. I ducked sideways, a reflexive movement carved into my bones from a decade of dodging fists and weapons for them. I didn't hit back. There was no need. I just picked up the heavy briefcase and gave Stella one last look. Her face held no concern for my safety. There was only the cold fury of someone whose plan had been disrupted, whose authority had been publicly challenged. "Stella," I said, my voice like a judge delivering a verdict 10 years too late. "As of today, we're even." I was sentencing my own absurd past life to death. With that, I turned to leave. "Stop him. Break his goddamn legs." Kyle shrieked behind me. A couple of his goons moved to block my path. I didn't stop walking. I just spoke over my shoulder, my voice cold. Kyle, this $5 million was your severance package for me. Are you really going to try and take it back now? I let that sink in. Think about how that would look for the Prescott family name. The goons hesitated, looking from Kyle to Stella. I didn't look back again. I walked, step by step, out of the locker room that was soaked in 10 years of my blood and tears. Behind me, the tomb of my youth collapsed into dust. As I dragged the heavy case through the gym's heavy steel door, the harsh afternoon sun hit me. My heart was a landscape of ruins, but I was finally free. I flagged down a cab, shoved the case into the trunk, and got in. The nearest bank, please, I told the driver. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. My cheap t-shirt was stained with grime and a little blood, and my face was bruised from a fight earlier. He probably thought I was a thug who just finished a dirty job. He didn't ask questions, just slammed his foot on the gas. I didn't know it then, but just after I left, Stella stopped Kyle from chasing after me. Kyle was losing his mind. Stella, what the hell are you doing? I'm going to kill him. Stella just stared coldly in the direction I'd left, a flicker of annoyance in her voice that even she didn't recognize. He's just a stray dog, Kyle. You'll dirty your hands on him. She paused. He took the money. Now he's out of our lives. It's for the best. Kyle was still furious. But what he just said? Stella cut him off, her tone returning to its usual indifference. He won't live a week. She gave a slight, cruel smile. Do you really think a broke nobody dragging a briefcase with $5 million in cash can make it off this block alive? The taxi dropped me at a major bank downtown. I carried the case into the private client office, and under the wealth manager's suspicious gaze, I deposited the entire $5 million. Then, I used the new account to open an international brokerage portfolio. Without a moment's hesitation, I wired the entire sum into a single, obscure cryptocurrency. Ethereum. In my past life, this was the asset that 1 month from now would explode in value by over 30 times. The catalyst was 3 days away. A Wall Street hedge fund legend was about to publicly endorse it during a primetime interview on CNBC. With my investment made, I walked out of the bank. I had only a few $100s left in my pocket, but I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. This wasn't a gamble. It was a surgeon's precision, guided by perfect foresight. I didn't waste the next 3 days. I checked into the cheapest motel I could find and bought a burner phone. I started searching for one person, Leo Vance. In my previous life, he was known as the Phantom of Wall Street, a reclusive financial genius. He came from nothing, but had an almost supernatural gift for the markets, making and losing fortunes by the time he was 25. He eventually became my right-hand man, the architect who helped me build Abyss Capital into a corporate empire that made our enemies tremble. But I found him too late last time. By then, he had been wiped out by a bad call, buried in debt to loan sharks after a leveraged position went sideways. His girlfriend had left him, and he was a broken man. I was the one who pulled him out of the gutter. This time, I would find him before he hit bottom. Following my memory, I quickly pinpointed his location, a grimy, 24-hour gaming lounge called Level Up on the west side. When I arrived, the place was thick with smoke, the air a mix of stale ramen and the frantic clicking of keyboards. I found Leo in a dark corner. He was wearing a faded t-shirt, his hair was greasy, and his eyes were bloodshot, glued to the candlestick charts on his monitor. A small mountain of cigarette butts lay at his feet. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Just then, a commotion erupted at the entrance. A few heavily tattooed guys shoved their way in. The leader, a bald man with a neck like a tree trunk, kicked a chair out of his way and strode directly toward Leo. Now, you owe the boss 50 grand. Payday's today. Leo's body went rigid. His face turned ghost white. He turned, his voice trembling. Rhino, just give me a few more days. I swear, I'm about to turn it all around. Turn around? Rhino grabbed him by the collar and hauled him out of his chair. With what? You gonna bet your life savings? Oh, wait, you don't fucking have any. One of Rhino's cronies, a skinny guy with yellow-dyed hair, grinned and flicked open a switchblade, tapping the flat of the blade against Leo's cheek. Pay up, or you lose a leg. Your choice. The rest of the lounge went silent, the only sound the oblivious tapping of some gamer in the back. Leo closed his eyes in despair. At that moment, A calm voice cut through the tension. I'll cover his debt. Every head turned. I stepped out from a small crowd of onlookers and stood in front of Rhino. He looked me up and down, taking in my cheap clothes and bruised face, and sneered. You? Who the hell are you? You even know what 50 grand looks like? I didn't waste words. I took out my new phone, opened my banking app, and showed him the balance. It was only a few $100, but then I clicked over to the investment portfolio. The long string of numbers representing my Ethereum holdings made Rhino's eyes nearly pop out of his head. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he understood the number of zeros. His attitude shifted instantly, his scowl replaced by a greasy, sycophantic smile. My apologies, boss. Didn't know who I was talking to. My mistake. I put my phone away. Give me your account number. I'll wire it. I paused. But I need you to do one thing for me. Rhino practically bowed. Anything you say, boss. Break his leg, I said, nodding toward the yellow-haired punk with a knife. The punk's face went white. Rhino didn't hesitate. He spun around and backhanded the kid across the face. Idiot. You don't pull a knife in front of the boss. You got no class. He jerked his head at his other men, who immediately dragged the kid outside. A moment later, a sharp, piercing scream cut through the air. I transferred the $50,000. Rhino thanked me profusely and left with his crew. The lounge returned to its previous state of smoky silence, leaving only me and Leo, who had slumped to the floor. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, confusion, and the lingering fear of a man who'd just been pulled back from the brink. Who are you? Why did you help me? I walked over and looked down at him. In 1 month, I'm going to give you $100 billion to play with. I let the numbers sink in. The question is, are you ready for it? Leo looked at me like I was insane, but as he stared into my calm, unwavering eyes, some strange impulse made him save my number. I said nothing more and walked out of the lounge. 1 month later, the global crypto market was in an uproar. The endorsement from the Wall Street titan sent the price of Ethereum into the stratosphere. Just as I remembered, a perfect 30-fold increase. On the screen of the cheap laptop in my motel room, my portfolio balance showed a single, beautiful number. $150 million. I liquidated 2/3 of it, leaving me with $100 million in cash for seed capital and $50 million to continue growing in the market. Then I called Leo Vance. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, a voice, trembling with disbelief, came through. Boss, I founded my own investment firm. I called it Abyss Capital. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. I wired the $100 million into the corporate account and summoned Leo to my new office. It was the penthouse floor of a skyscraper in the Loop, with a view overlooking the entire glittering expanse of Chicago. Leo stood before me, still in that same faded t-shirt, but the despair in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raging fire. I slid a debit card across my desk toward him. There's $10 million on this. Consider it a warm-up. I paused. There's only one target. Leo held his breath. I turned to the panoramic window, staring at the distant, gleaming skyscraper that housed the headquarters of the Prescott family's empire. Within 6 months, I want you to systematically dismantle the Prescott family's primary source of revenue, their global shipping operations. I turned back to him, my voice flat and cold. I want them bankrupt. 3. Abyss Capital appeared like a leviathan rising from the depths, and it immediately began to terrorize the market. Leo did not disappoint. He was like a starving wolf finally let loose in a sheep pasture. Fueled by our massive war chest, he was a force of nature. Using a few key pieces of information I provided about future market shifts, he executed a series of trades in stocks and commodities that were nothing short of masterpieces of financial warfare. In just 2 months, our firm's capital doubled to $200 million. The name Abyss Capital began to be whispered in trading circles and boardrooms. Everyone was wondering who was behind this new, ruthlessly efficient firm that had come out of nowhere. I, however, remained in the shadows. One evening, Leo and I were discussing our next move over dinner at an upscale French restaurant. He was a new man, dressed in a tailored suit, his face alight with the confidence of a born winner. Boss, The Prescotts are bidding on a new European shipping lane. It's a make-or-break deal for them, he reported. I've already positioned us to... He was cut off by an arrogant voice from a nearby table. Well, if it isn't the Prescott's little pet dog. I looked up. A young man in a loud designer shirt and a diamond earring was approaching, his arm around a surgically enhanced Instagram model. He was looking at me with pure disdain. Chad Mulligan, youngest son of the Mulligan family. In my past life, he was one of Stella's many wannabe suitors, and by far the dumbest. He'd used his family's money to harass me on more than one occasion. Once, right in front of Stella, he'd thrown a wad of cash in my face and told me to bark for it. I'd swallow my pride then, because Stella had told me the Mulligan's port access was important for her family's business. Now, I didn't have to swallow anything. My clothes were still off the rack, costing less than $200 total, a stark contrast to the restaurant's opulent decor. Chad's sneer deepened. What's the matter? The Prescotts finally kick you to the curb. How can you even afford to breathe the air in here? He mocked. Did you finally burn through that $5 million pity payment? So, he knew about the money. That idiot Kyle must have been bragging. I calmly went back to cutting my steak. Leo, however, stood up, his expression glacial. Mr. Mulligan, I suggest you watch your tone. He gestured to me. This is Ethan Cross, the president of Abyss Capital. Chad blinked, then burst out laughing, bending over with exaggerated hilarity. Abyss Capital? What the hell is that? Never heard of it. He roared. President? Ha ha. Since when do we call a stray dog a president? His date giggled along with him, looking at me as if I were the punchline to a fantastic joke. The commotion drew the attention of other diners. Chad basked in the spotlight. He sauntered over to my table, deliberately raising his voice. Ethan, do yourself a favor and get the hell out of here. You're staining the carpet. I finished my bite, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and finally met his gaze. Is that so? I took out my phone and made a call right in front of him. It was picked up almost instantly. Mr. Cross, good evening. How can I help you? A deferential voice said. It was Mr. Henderson, the director of my private bank, where I had recently deposited a 9-figure sum. I spoke calmly. Mr. Henderson, good evening. I paused, letting the name sink in. That $100 million line of credit for the Mulligan family's expansion. I'm starting to think it's a bit of a risky investment. Perhaps you should reconsider it. Henderson didn't hesitate. I understand completely, Mr. Cross. Consider it done. I hung up. The entire call lasted less than 30 seconds. The smile froze on Chad Mulligan's face. He hadn't processed what just happened. Then, his phone began to vibrate violently. He fumbled to answer it. It was his father. The man's panicked, screaming voice echoed through the silent restaurant. Chad, you son of a bitch. Who did you piss off? The bank just called. They're pulling our financing. The company is going under. We're ruined. The color drained from Chad's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The hand holding his phone trembled as he stared at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was reserved for things that crawl out of nightmares. You. He couldn't form a sentence. I stood up and walked over to him. I took a silk pocket square from my jacket and slowly, deliberately wiped my hands as if I had just touched something filthy. Then I dropped the square on his face. Tell Stella, I said, my voice low and clear. Next time she wants to send someone to test me, she should send someone with a brain. Without a backward glance, I walked out with Leo, leaving the entire restaurant staring in stunned silence. Chad Mulligan's legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor. He would never understand. Some men, once you break their chains, don't just run away. They come back as wolves. The revenge plot proceeded like clockwork. Under the combined assault from Leo and me, the Prescott family lost their bid for the new European shipping lane, a devastating blow. Soon after, several of their subsidiary companies were hit with scandals involving financial fraud and workplace safety violations. Their stock price plummeted, erasing billions in market value. The once invincible Prescott empire was now teetering on the brink of collapse. Every day, I sat in my office, watching the Prescott family's net worth bleed out on a monitor, but I felt none of the satisfaction I had anticipated. Instead, there was just a vast, hollow emptiness. I was a lone wolf who had run across the plains for too long. Even after I had torn out the throats of all my enemies, I still had nowhere to go. I started having trouble sleeping, spending my nights sitting by the panoramic window, watching the endless sea of lights in the city below. Not a single one of them was shining for me. One night, a torrential rainstorm lashed the city. I finished up at the office and was driving back to my hotel. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in stark, ghostly flashes. As my car passed a quiet alley, I was blinded by a sudden flash of headlights, followed by the sickening squeal of tires on wet pavement. A black sedan sped away, splashing through a massive puddle. In its wake, a tiny, fragile body lay in the street, twitching in a pool of water and blood. It was a kitten, barely a few weeks old. The rain washed over its white fur, mixing with the crimson blood. It let out a faint cry, a sound like a newborn baby's whimper. In that instant, I saw myself in my past life, dying on the cold ground of the docks. The same hard rain, the same helplessness. Everyone had just walked past me. No one stopped. On pure instinct, I slammed on the brakes. I threw open my car door and ran into the downpour. The rain instantly soaked through my expensive, custom-tailored suit. I gently scooped up the kitten. Its tiny body trembled in my palm. Its breathing, so shallow, was almost gone. I tore off my suit jacket, wrapped the kitten in it, and ran like a madman through the rain, desperately searching for the glowing sign of a vet clinic. Finally, at the end of a block, I saw it. A small, dimly lit sign. Sunshine Pet Clinic. I burst through the door. A young woman in a white coat and a ponytail jumped, startled, dropping the book she was reading. She looked up and saw me, a soaking wet man, radiating a cold, violent energy, clutching a bloody bundle. But she wasn't afraid. She rushed forward. What happened to him? Her voice was gentle, like the first rays of sun after a storm. I handed her the kitten, my own voice hoarse and unrecognizable. He was hit by a car. Please save him. She took the tiny animal and immediately ran toward an operating room, calling back over her shoulder, "Don't worry, I've got him." I stood outside the operating room, my body freezing, rainwater dripping from my hair onto the linoleum floor. I couldn't sit still. It was the first time since my rebirth that I had felt this kind of anxiety. It wasn't for revenge, and it wasn't for money. It was for a small, fragile life I didn't even know. I waited all night. The next morning, as the first light of dawn streamed through the window, the door to the operating room opened. The young woman emerged, looking exhausted but smiling brightly. She gave me a thumbs up. "He's going to be okay. He's a tough little guy." The sunlight fell on her clean, honest face and illuminated her clear, bright eyes. At that moment, I felt a tiny crack appear in my heart, which had been frozen and numb for so long. A single beam of light had found its way in. Her name was Clara Evans. She was the owner and sole employee of the clinic. I learned that the clinic was constantly losing money. She kept it open only because she offered free services for stray animals, a cause she was deeply passionate about. Watching her eat a plain bagel for lunch to save money, something inside me shifted. I made an anonymous donation to the clinic's account. Not a huge amount, $50,000, enough for her to renovate the place and hire some help. I started visiting the clinic regularly to see the kitten. He was recovering remarkably well, already full of energy. Clara asked me what I wanted to name him. I thought for a moment. Let's call him 150. The strange name made her laugh, her eyes crinkling into happy crescents. She said she'd never heard such a materialistic name for a cat. I didn't tell her that the number represented the start of my new life. The time I spent with Clara was the most relaxed I'd been since my rebirth. We would feed 150 together and clean up the clinic. She would tell me stories about the strays she'd rescued, her eyes full of a pure, unadulterated love for her work. She never asked about my past. She wasn't intimidated by the cold, violent aura that kept everyone else at a distance. It was as if she could see past my hardened exterior to the wasteland within. "You know, Ethan," she said one day, "you have a really nice smile. You should use it more often." That day, after I left the clinic, I looked at myself in my car's rearview mirror and tried to smile. The man in the reflection pulled his lips back, but his eyes remained as cold as ice. A puppet who had forgotten how to feel joy. Perhaps, I thought, I would only be able to truly smile on the day my revenge was complete. The city's annual charity gala auction was held, as always, at the most exclusive hotel. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite, the tiny fraction of people who sat at the very top of the pyramid. In previous years, I was only allowed in as a bodyguard for the Prescott family, standing silently in a corner while Stella moved through the crowd, a dazzling socialite charming everyone she met. This year, as the president of Abyss Capital, I was seated at the main table. My tablemates were the titans of industry who controlled the city's economic pulse. They greeted me warmly, eager to exchange business cards and curry favor with the city's most explosive rising star. I handled their advances with practiced ease, my eyes scanning the ballroom. It didn't take long to find them. The Prescott family. Kyle stood behind his father, Arthur Prescott, looking gaunt and anxious. Arthur, once a lion of the business world, now looked old and tired, his temples grayed. He was forcing a smile as he greeted people, but no one of consequence paid him any real attention. People are always quick to abandon a sinking ship. Stella was still a vision in a designer gown and flawless makeup, holding herself with the same proud defiance. But the deep-seated worry in her eyes betrayed her calm facade. I knew what they were so desperate for. The Prescott family's cash flow had dried up. The banks had rejected all their loan applications. Their only hope was tonight's auction. The main event was a parcel of land in the South Loop being sold by the city for a new commercial development. If they could win the bid, they could use the land as collateral to secure a life-saving loan and stave off ruin. It was their last lifeline. Unfortunately for them, I was here. The auction began. The first few items were art and jewelry, and I watched with disinterest. Then, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the hall. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final item of the evening, the prime commercial development plot, South Loop Section 001. The bidding will start at $50 million. A charge went through the room. Arthur and Kyle's eyes lit up with the desperate hope of drowning men spotting a piece of driftwood. $55 million. Kyle was the first to raise his paddle, his voice shaking slightly. $60 million. The CEO of a rival real estate firm countered. $62 million. $65. The price climbed steadily. Kyle kept raising his paddle, his bid small and cautious, showing the strain, but he was clearly determined to win. The price quickly shot up to $80 million. This was already more than most considered the land to be worth. The field had narrowed to just Kyle and one other bidder. $81 million. Kyle grit his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as he raised his paddle one more time. The other CEO hesitated, then shook his head and set his paddle down. The auctioneer began the final count. $81 million, going once. $81 million, going twice. A look of ecstatic relief washed over Kyle's face. He grabbed his father's arm in triumph. Even Stella seemed to relax, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Just as the auctioneer's gavel was about to fall, I raised my paddle. My voice, calm and unhurried, echoed through the vast ballroom. $100 million. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. To raise the bid by nearly $20 million in a single stroke was an audacious display of financial power. The look of triumph on Kyle's face curdled. He whipped his head around, and when he saw it was me, his expression went through a spectacular series of transformations, from shock to rage, then to a sickly, pale white. Arthur Prescott slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Stella stared at me, her beautiful eyes wide with disbelief, confusion, and a flicker of something she herself didn't recognize. Panic. I didn't look at them. I simply lifted my glass of wine and gave a slight nod to the auctioneer. The auctioneer, snapping out of his stupor, shouted with renewed vigor. $100 million. A bid of $100 million from Mr. Cross of Abyss Capital. Do I hear any other bids? The room was silent. $100 million was far beyond the land's real value. This was no longer a business transaction. It was a public execution. $100 million, going once, going twice. Sold, the auctioneer cried, his gavel cracking against the block. To Mr. Ethan Cross of Abyss Capital, amid a thunderous round of applause, the auctioneer gestured toward me. For those who don't know, this is the brilliant young mind behind Abyss Capital, our city's most formidable new entrepreneur, Mr. Ethan Cross. A true visionary. Camera flashes exploded in my direction. I stood and gave a polite nod to the crowd. My gaze swept past them to the corner where the three members of the Prescott family sat, utterly defeated. The family that had once stood at the pinnacle of this city, who had treated me like dirt beneath their shoes. Now, under the watchful eyes of the entire city's elite, they were nothing more than a pathetic, humiliated backdrop for my coronation. I raised my glass in Stella's direction and offered a small smile. It held no trace of our past, only the detached amusement of a victor, and a touch of pity. I knew, in that moment, that the power dynamic between us had been irrevocably, permanently reversed. And this was only the beginning. News of the auction spread like wildfire. By the next morning, it was the talk of the town. Ethan Cross of Abyss Capital snatches Prescott's lifeline with bold $100 million bid. The story was the headline of every financial news outlet. The Prescott Corporation's stock responded accordingly. It nosedived, hitting the circuit breaker within 30 minutes of the market opening. Calls from banks demanding payment and emails from partners terminating contracts flooded the Prescott Tower. The building, once a symbol of their wealth and power, now seemed on the verge of collapse. I knew they would come to me. I just didn't expect it to be so soon. That afternoon, while I was reviewing some documents, my assistant buzzed. Mr. Cross, Arthur Prescott, Kyle Prescott, and Stella Prescott from the Prescott Corporation are here to see you. She paused. They don't have an appointment. I didn't even look up from my desk. Let them wait in the lobby. My assistant was surprised, but simply replied, "Yes, sir," and hung up. I went back to my work as if nothing had happened. 1 hour passed. Then 2. It wasn't until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my office, that I finally closed the file I was working on and stretched. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the main lobby. The three of them were still there, waiting, standing like statues frozen in time. Employees walking past shot curious glances at them, whispering amongst themselves. I was certain that in their entire lives, they had never been subjected to such a humiliating slight. I pressed the button on my intercom. Send them up. A few minutes later, they were escorted into my office. Arthur Prescott looked as though he had aged 10 years overnight. He stared at me, his lips trembling, unable to speak. It was Kyle who spoke first. The arrogance and swagger were gone, replaced by a forced, pathetic smile. He was even slightly stooped over. Mr. Cross, he stammered. The title sounded like poison in his mouth. I was a fool before. I didn't know who I was dealing with. Please, you're a big man. Don't hold a grudge against a nobody like me. I held up a hand to cut him off. My gaze went past him to Stella. She still wore her mask of pride, but her face was pale, and she was biting her lip so hard it was turning white. I leaned back in my plush leather chair and spoke slowly. If you've come here to beg, you should at least have the decency to act like it. I fixed my eyes on her. And you, Miss Prescott? Kyle's face flushed a deep, ugly red, but he didn't dare say a word. Arthur nudged his daughter with his elbow. Stella's body was rigid. Her pride was a physical barrier preventing her from bowing to me, the man who was once her servant. I chuckled softly and made a move to stand. It seems Miss Prescott values her pride more than the survival of her family's legacy. In that case, we have nothing to discuss. Leo, show them out. Leo, who had been standing silently behind me, immediately gestured toward the door. Wait! Stella's voice was strained, laced with a tremor she couldn't conceal. It was the sound of her entire world breaking. Ethan, let's talk. I settled back into my chair, tapping my fingers rhythmically on the polished wood of my desk. The sound echoed in the silent office, each tap like a drumbeat on the Prescott's frayed nerves. Fine, we can talk, I said, my eyes locked on her defiant, pale face. An idea, a perfect, cruel idea, formed in my mind. A way to shatter what little pride she had left. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. I let the words hang in the air. If I'm in a good mood, perhaps I'll consider the matter of the Prescott family survival. Before the words were even fully out of my mouth, Kyle exploded. Ethan, don't you dare go too far. I shot him a look so cold it froze the words in his throat. Does it look like you're in a position to be making demands? Kyle fell silent. Stella's entire body was trembling now. Humiliating tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back, refusing to let them fall. She knew what this was. Payback for every moment of humiliation they had ever put me through. She closed her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath, as if it took all the strength she had left in the world. When she opened them again, she looked directly at me and forced out a single word. Fine. As soon as she said it, it was as if her strings had been cut. She turned and walked out of my office, her retreat hasty and undignified. Arthur and Kyle scrambled to follow her. The office was quiet again. Leo came to my side, a hint of concern in his voice. Boss, are you really going to help them? I shook my head, my eyes following Stella's figure as she burst out of the building's main entrance far below. I just want her to see something, I said softly. I want her to see that everything she was so proud of, everything she used to hold over me, is utterly worthless. And then I'm going to take it all away from her, piece by piece, because I would never, ever forget the look in her eyes as she stepped over my dead body. 7 for our dinner the next evening, I chose the most expensive and exclusive restaurant in the city, the revolving one at the top of the observatory tower. Stella arrived on time. She had clearly put a great deal of effort into her appearance. She wore a stunning, backless black dress. Her makeup was flawless, and a river of diamonds glittered at her throat. She was trying to weaponize her beauty, to cling to the last vestiges of her dignity. It was a miscalculation. I had also invited the CEO of a rival corporation. We were in the middle of negotiating a multi-billion-dollar merger. When Stella walked in, I simply nodded at her and gestured to the empty chair at our table. Then I turned back to my guest and never looked at her again. Right in front of her, I laughed and traded stories with my business partner, our conversation flowing from global financial trends to future industrial tech synergies. We were engrossed, animated. It was as if Stella wasn't there at all, just another piece of furniture or a silent, beautiful waitress. She sat there for 2 full hours. She couldn't get a single word in. The exquisite meal placed before her remained untouched. The stem of her wine glass was in danger of snapping from the pressure of her grip. I could feel the waves of humiliation and rage rolling off her, so thick they were almost tangible. This, I knew, was far more painful for her than a public slap in the face. This was a clear, undeniable demonstration that she and the entire Prescott family had been exiled from my world. We were not on the same level anymore. We weren't even playing the same game. Finally, my guest signed the contract with a satisfied smile, shook my hand, and departed. The restaurant was quiet, leaving just the two of us. She could no longer contain herself. Her voice was a raw, broken whisper. What do you want from me? I dabbed my mouth with my napkin, feigning surprise as if I had just noticed she was there. Want? I don't want anything. I stood up. Dinner's over. You can go now. Stella stared at me in utter disbelief, her body trembling with fury. You were just toying with me? I smiled. A genuine, cold smile. Ms. Prescott, you were the one who insisted on having dinner with me. I certainly didn't beg you to come. I paused at the door. As for your family's business, I'll consider it. I put a special emphasis on the word consider. Looking at her face, twisted with a humiliation so profound it was almost ugly, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not joy, just boredom. So this was revenge. It was emptier than I had imagined. I turned to leave. Ethan, her voice, coming from behind me, held a note of vulnerability I had never heard before. Is there really no chance for us? At all? I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Sure, there's a chance. I let the silence stretch. When the Prescott family is officially bankrupt and you find yourself with nowhere to go, maybe then I'll consider hiring you as a janitor at my company. Without another word, I walked out. Behind me, I heard the sound of shattering porcelain. I drove away from the restaurant, but I didn't go back to my hotel. Without consciously deciding to, I found myself parked outside Clara's pet clinic. It was late, but a light was still on inside. I let myself in and found Clara asleep at her desk, still in her white coat. 150 was curled up at her feet. I walked over, took off my jacket, and gently draped it over her shoulders. She stirred, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Ethan, what are you doing here? Came to see 150, I lied, nodding at the cat. The cat immediately trotted over and started rubbing against my leg. Clara smiled at my transparent excuse. I think you came to see me. She stood up and poured me a cup of hot tea. We stayed there for a while, giving 150 a late-night snack. She told me about a few new strays the clinic had taken in, animatedly describing their quirky personalities. Her eyes were so clear, so full of warmth. In her presence, the cloud of rage and exhaustion that constantly surrounded me began to dissipate. I had a sudden realization. The fleeting, hollow satisfaction of my revenge on Stella was nothing compared to this. This quiet, simple warmth was what my soul had been starving for. As I was leaving, Clara walked me to the door. She suddenly said, "Ethan, you seem troubled tonight." I froze. She stood on her toes, reached out, and gently smoothed the tense lines on my forehead. Her touch was cool, but sent a jolt of warmth through me. "Don't frown so much," she said softly. "If something's wrong, you can talk to me about it. I may not be able to solve your problems, but I'm a very good listener." I looked down into her clear, earnest eyes, so close to mine, and for the first time in a decade, my heart skipped a beat. I quickly looked away, feeling flustered, and made a hasty retreat to my car. Sitting behind the wheel, I could still feel the phantom warmth of her fingertips on my skin. I think I realized with a jolt of panic I have a weakness now. The rise of Abyss Capital was unstoppable. After acquiring several mid-sized companies, we set our sights on the city's other corporate behemoth, Apex Holdings. Apex's business portfolio was very similar to the Prescott Corporation's, but they were far more powerful and had deeper connections. Conquering Apex would mean controlling half of the city's economy. But this time we hit a wall. During the bidding for a crucial overseas mining project, it was as if Apex knew our every move in advance. They countered every one of our offers, anticipated our strategies, and ultimately won the project by a razor-thin margin. It was the first major defeat for Abyss Capital. Leo was grim. "Boss, there has to be a leak." They knew our entire playbook. I stared at a photo of the CEO of Apex Holdings on my monitor, my eyes cold. He was a man in his early 30s, with gold-rimmed glasses and a sophisticated, charming smile. But behind the lenses, his eyes held a chilling, predatory intelligence. Julian Thorne. Of course, I knew him. In my past life, he was the one who had partnered with Stella. Together, they had set the trap at the docks that had ended my life. He was her final choice. A man who was even more ruthless, even more soulless than she was. I hadn't expected to face him so soon in this life, and it seemed he was rising faster and with more ferocity than before. A few days later, we met in person at a business gala. He approached me, a glass of champagne in his hand and a practiced, insincere smile on his face. "Mr. Cross, I've heard so much about you. A pleasure to finally meet the wunderkind of Chicago finance." I clinked my glass against his. The sound was sharp, final. "Mr. Thorne, the pleasure is all mine." I met his gaze. "I just hope your foundations are solid. Some companies climb so fast they forget how hard the fall can be." He understood my meaning perfectly. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned to ice. "We'll see, won't we?" he said smoothly. "I, for one, am very excited to see what other surprises you have in store for me." The war had begun. Julian's methods were far more sophisticated and venomous than the brutish tactics of someone like Kyle Prescott. He attacked us on all fronts. He poached our key employees, bought out our strategic partners, and spread vicious, anonymous rumors about our firm's stability. For a time, Abyss Capital was under siege. But with my perfect knowledge of future market shifts and Leo's unparalleled trading skills, we always managed to turn the tables at the last second, often turning his attacks back on him. We were like two apex predators locked in a bloody, primal battle for territory in the concrete jungle of the city. Julian quickly realized he couldn't beat me in a straightforward business war. So, he resorted to dirtier tactics. He started digging into my personal life, searching for a weakness. One day, Leo walked into my office, his face grave. He handed me a manila envelope. "Boss, this was delivered by a messenger. From Julian Thorne's office." I opened it. Inside was a series of high-resolution photographs. They were of me, coming and going from Claire's clinic. There was a shot of me from behind, walking with her in a park as I held 150. There was another, a close-up of her on her tiptoes, her face full of gentle concern as she smoothed my brow outside the clinic door. Every picture was perfectly framed, perfectly clear. At the bottom of the stack was a small, typed note. It contained a single sentence. "Mr. Cross, your weakness is quite charming." My hand clenched around the photos, my knuckles turning white. A wave of pure, cold rage, an emotion I hadn't felt since the moment of my death, washed over me. I knew Julian. I knew what he was capable of. He was a sociopath who would not hesitate to destroy an innocent woman to get what he wanted. I immediately got on the phone with an old contact from my past life and paid an exorbitant fee to hire a team of elite private security contractors, ex-special forces, to provide 24/7 protection for Clara. Then I called her. Clara, I need you to do something for me. Can you stay away from the clinic for a little while? She sounded confused. Why? It's so busy. There are so many animals that need me. I didn't know how to explain the danger she was in. I couldn't drag her into the bloody vortex of my revenge. All I could do was force a harsh, commanding tone. Just listen to me. Take a few days off. I'll cover all the clinic's expenses. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice came back, small and hesitant. Ethan, are you in some kind of trouble? My chest tightened. No, don't worry about it. After I hung up, I stared out at the city lights, and for the first time, I felt a deep, gnawing fear. I had built an empire from nothing. I thought I was invincible, but I was powerless to protect the one person who mattered. Julian, I thought, my hands balling into fists. You had better not touch her. If you do, I swear to God, I will show you what hell really looks like. I underestimated Julian Thorne's depravity. I had placed the best security money could buy around Claire's clinic. I thought she was safe, but Julian's methods were more insidious than I could have imagined. He didn't send thugs. He didn't make a direct move. He found a gambling addict who lived in the apartment below the clinic and paid off his debts. Late one night, the addict in a drunken stupor accidentally knocked over a propane tank in his kitchen. The apartment was directly beneath Sunshine Pet Clinic. Boom! The explosion rocked the entire block. I was in my boardroom, about to sign a contract for a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, when my phone rang. It was the head of my security detail, his voice frantic. Boss, there's been an accident. A fire broke out at the clinic. Ms. Evans went back inside to save the animals. She's trapped. For a second, the world went silent. My mind was a roaring, white void. All I could hear was the frantic, hammering pulse in my ears. The $1 million fountain pen in my hand slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I abandoned the contract, ignored the shocked faces of the other executives, and sprinted from the room. In my past life, when I lay dying with 3 bullets in my chest for Stella, I had not felt a fear as profound as this. In that horrifying moment, I finally understood. Revenge. My empire. All of it was meaningless garbage. I could not lose her. I absolutely could not. I drove like a madman, blowing through red lights, pushing my car to its absolute limit. When I arrived, the scene was chaos. Flames licked at the sky, turning the night a hellish orange. Acrid smoke burned my lungs. The wail of sirens was a physical pain in my ears. The clinic was a raging inferno. My security team grabbed me, physically restraining me. Boss, you can't. It's too dangerous. I shoved them away, my eyes bloodshot, ready to charge into the flames myself. Let me go. Just then, 2 firefighters emerged from the smoke, supporting a soot-covered figure between them. It was Clara. She was clutching a pet carrier to her chest. She saw me, and a weak, trembling smile touched her lips. Ethan, look. She coughed, her voice raspy. 150. He's okay. Then, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. I surged forward and caught her before she hit the ground. The pet carrier fell, and 150 let out a terrified shriek from inside. I looked down at Clara's face, blackened with soot and grime, and the tension that had been holding me together finally snapped. She was alive. Thank God. She was alive. And in the wake of that relief came a wave of rage, so cold, so absolute. It felt like my soul was freezing over. Julian Thorne, you are a dead man. I gently passed Clara to the paramedics, watching as they loaded her into the ambulance. Then I turned to the captain of my security team. My voice was devoid of all emotion, as cold and quiet as the grave. Find him. Find a man who set the fire, and find a man who paid him. I want him, and everyone else involved in this, to understand the meaning of suffering. Make it slow. Clara was taken to the best private hospital in the city. The doctors confirmed she had smoke inhalation and some minor burns, but she was out of danger. I sat by her bedside all night, watching her pale, sleeping face. The fear and rage warred inside me, a toxic cocktail that threatened to consume me. She woke up early the next morning. The first thing she asked, her voice hoarse, was 150? What about the other animals? I told her they were all safe, that I had already arranged for them to be moved to a temporary shelter. She finally relaxed, then looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. I'm so sorry, Ethan. The clinic you built for me. I let it all burn down. I took her hand. As long as you're okay, I said, my voice thick with emotion, nothing else matters. After making sure she was comfortable, I stepped out into the hallway. I called Leo. Lau. I'm here, boss. 3 days, I said. My voice was unnervingly calm. I want Apex Holdings wiped from the face of the earth. Whatever it takes. Burn it all down. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, Leo's voice came back, imbued with a conviction I had never heard from him before. Understood. What followed was the most brutal, scorched-earth corporate takedown the city had ever seen. I unleashed our entire war chest. I called in every favor, leveraged every alliance. We began a relentless, massive short-selling campaign against Apex stock. Simultaneously, I activated every underworld contact from my previous life. I paid fortunes to dig up every piece of dirt on Julian Thorne. Julian could never have anticipated the sheer ferocity of my retaliation. I was no longer a strategist. I was a berserker, willing to sacrifice my entire empire for the sole purpose of his annihilation. Day 1. Under the weight of our coordinated attack, Apex's stock crashed, triggering a market-wide halt. Day 2. A mountain of irrefutable evidence detailing Julian's history of financial crimes. Money laundering, insider trading, bribery was anonymously delivered to the SEC, the DOJ, and every major news outlet. The story exploded. Apex's partners began to defect in droves. The banks froze his credit lines and called in their loans. His entire financial structure imploded. He panicked. He tried to revert to his old tricks, sending a team of his best enforcers to intimidate me. But his best were amateurs compared to the team of ex-Delta Force operators I had on my payroll. They were intercepted, neutralized, and dumped, bruised and broken, on the steps of the nearest police station. Day 3. Apex Holdings filed for bankruptcy. Julian Thorne was arrested at the airport, trying to flee the country on a forged passport. I watched it all unfold on the news, standing in Clara's hospital room. I saw the footage of Julian, his perfect facade shattered, being shoved into the back of a police car. Clara saw the news report, too. She turned to me, her eyes wide with a dawning, worried understanding. Ethan, this was you, wasn't it? I didn't answer. I felt no triumph, no thrill of victory, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm was finally over. I walked to her bedside and gently, carefully, pulled her into an embrace. I could finally protect the one ray of light in my dark world. The collapse of Apex Holdings sent shockwaves through the city. The fall of such a titan left a massive power vacuum. I moved swiftly, acquiring the most valuable of Apex's assets in the ensuing chaos. Abyss Capital expanded exponentially, becoming the undisputed new king of the city's corporate landscape. In the wake of all this, the Prescott family, the original source of all my pain, had been all but forgotten. Their company struggled on for a few more months before finally succumbing to bankruptcy and liquidation. Arthur Prescott suffered a stroke and was confined to a hospital bed. Kyle, buried in gambling debts, disappeared. Only Stella was left, a lonely queen in an empty castle, presiding over a portfolio of worthless stock certificates. She must have seen the news. She must have seen how I had obliterated Julian Thorne and his entire empire in 3 days, all for Clara. Perhaps it was only then that she finally understood what it meant. The kind of all-consuming, world-burning love she once had in the palm of her hand. The love she had thrown away like trash. One rainy evening, my motorcade pulled up in front of my office building. I saw her waiting. Stella. She was standing by the entrance under a clear umbrella, looking as if she had been waiting for me. She wore a beautiful dress, but it couldn't hide the deep, weary sorrow on her face. When she saw me get out of the car, she rushed forward, blocking my path. The rain soaked the hem of her dress, making her look small and pathetic. My bodyguards immediately moved to intercept her. I waved them off. I walked toward her until we were standing face to face, separated by the curtain of falling rain. Her expression was a maelstrom of regret, resentment, and a desperate, pleading hope. "Ethan," she said, her voice hoarse, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "I was wrong." She looked me in the eye. Can we go back to how things were? Go back. Go back to the me who took a knife for you, only for you to complain that my blood was staining your clothes? Go back to the me who fought your battles, while you laughed and flirted with other men. Or go back to the me who died for you, only for you to step over my corpse without a second glance. I was too tired to even answer the question. I didn't roll down my window. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded to my driver. The car began to move again, gliding slowly past her. In my rearview mirror, I saw her engulfed in the car's exhaust and the dirty spray from the street. The rain washed the makeup from her face, her tears indistinguishable from the downpour. Finally, she collapsed to the pavement, a broken doll, sobbing silently in the rain. In that moment, the last embers of my hatred for her were extinguished, washed clean by the rain. She was no longer worth the energy. I had personally buried my past, and in its place, I had built my own future. I finally understood. In my last life, I didn't lose because of her cruelty. I lost because of my own blind, foolish obsession. Now, the obsession was gone, and it was time for me to embrace my new life. 12 a day, Clara was discharged from the hospital. The sun was shining brightly. I want to pick her up. I didn't take the Rolls Royce. I didn't bring a security detail. I drove my most ordinary sedan, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. I wanted to be the same man she first met, just a normal guy, worried about someone he cared for. I took her to the new Sunshine Pet Clinic. I had bought an entire 3-story building and had it renovated to her exact specifications. It was 10 times larger than her old clinic, equipped with the best veterinary technology in the world. It even had a small, grassy yard where the rescued animals could run and play. Clara stood in front of the new building, looking at the gleaming new facility, but she didn't have the overjoyed reaction I had expected. She turned, took my hand, and looked at me with a serious expression. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I don't want you to become a monster for my sake." Her eyes were so clear, they seemed to see right through me, past the corporate titan, past the vengeful killer, to the broken man underneath. My heart clenched. I held her hand tightly. I used to think that if I had the whole world, I could have anything I wanted. But then I met you, and I realized, I looked into her eyes. Having you is having the whole world, and I would do anything to protect my world. But don't worry, I added, a small, unpracticed smile touching my lips. From now on, the only things these hands will be used for are cooking you dinner and cleaning 150's litter box. My clumsy attempt at a romantic line made her laugh. The sunlight on her face was more beautiful than any fortune I had ever amassed. Watching her smile, I took a deep breath and pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. I opened it. Inside wasn't some giant, gaudy diamond. It was a simple, elegant platinum band, set with a single, small, but perfectly cut diamond. It caught the light, sparkling with a quiet, warm brilliance. I dropped to one knee. It was a posture I had imagined 1,000 times in my dreams, but always for the wrong person. Thankfully, life had given me a chance to correct my mistake. Clara Evans. My voice was shaking slightly from nerves. For a long time, I was a stray dog, running wild in the dark. I was covered in scars and filled with hate. And then I met you. You were this. Light. You made me feel like this world was worth living in. I don't know how to be a good person, Clara. My old life was all violence and betrayal. But I want to learn. I want to learn how to be a normal man, who knows how to smile and how to love. For you. I looked up at her. Will you marry me? Will you be my teacher? Tears streamed down her face like strings of broken pearls. She was crying, but she was smiling at the same time. She didn't speak. She just nodded, her whole body shaking with a silent, happy sob. I took the ring and gently slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit,